Hey everyone, happy Thursday. Pastor George here with a new thing. And for today's topic, we get to dive into one of my favorite things is death. Or really, in this case, people trying to run away from death. And so, for our Bible passage today, I wanted to look at something from the book of Psalms. There's actually only one verse, but a few verses, but I'm going to really focus on one, but it's a good one. And so let's look at that. So our book, or rather our example here, comes from Psalm 90, our verse. And this is a prayer of Moses, the man of God. Sometimes the Psalms tell us where they come from or in what circumstance they were written. This time, all we get is that it's from Moses. And you can see that this is something that would be important for Moses to do or to say. And what I mean by that is it has a lot to do with God turning back from his anger and towards mercy, towards his people. This is a common theme in Exodus, common theme in all of the books of Moses, really. So Moses here is talking about that in a big way. But a lot of this psalm is about death and God's power over life and death. And it starts at verse 3. It says, "You turn people back to dust, saying, 'Return to dust, you mortals. 1,000 years in your sight are like a day that has just gone by, or like a watch in the night. Yet you sweep people away in the sleep of death. They are like the new grass of the morning. In the morning it springs up new, but by evening it is dry and withered. We are consumed by your anger and terrified by your indignation. You have set our iniquities before you, our secret sins in the light of your presence. All our days pass away under your wrath. We finish our years with a moan. Our days may come to 70 years, or 80, if our strength endures. Yet the best of them are but trouble and sorrow, for they quickly pass, and we fly away. If only we knew the power of your anger. Your wrath is as great as the fear that is your due. Teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom." One of my favorite verses in the Bible is 90:12, Psalm 90:12. "Teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom." And I think that is really kind of going to be the focus for today's verses, or for today's lesson, or what I want to talk about. Example, I should say. Because this is something that we don't really do. Maybe we do, but a lot of us don't, right? I think one of the things that COVID taught me in my ministry, but also in my personal life, is just like when it happened, and for the first time in a very, very long time, our society was encountering, in only a fraction of the way, death in the way that it was present in previous centuries. And I was thinking, because I'm an idiot, that maybe in this moment we would take time to really think and parse out like what it means to be surrounded by death, because we've gotten so good at medicine, and I have nothing against that. I think that's amazing. I think it's a miracle that we've been able to separate ourselves from death pretty well, and at least in the West. And I think that COVID brought to our attention that we are actually mortal, and that we can die, and that we really can't control it, right? People think we can, but we really can't. So I thought that was going to lead to some sort of revolution in the way that people kind of viewed their world, right? And I was wrong. Mostly wrong. Hopefully people ended up doing that. Hopefully they realized that their life is not theirs to control, that they really can't do everything in their power to keep themselves alive. But it seems as though a lot of people have taken the opposite approach. They've been vindicated or whatever, and have become even more so clinging on to their life. But all that is to say is that all this talk about whether or not we can live longer, right? I mean, I think what Moses says here when he talks about how long we live, right, it's really interesting. he talks about how we may come to 70 or 80 years, which at the time would have been, a long life. He's not speaking in a grandiose way of saying that's how long a human can live. Of course, Moses actually lived longer than that, according to the biblical testimony. And, of course, we know humans now who live past 100. So no one's, people can live past 80. But the point of that is just to say that, like, the human life is one that is fairly short compared to God. And this is why I think it's really important that we realize the difference between a creature and a creator, right? God is a creator. He's different than us. He stands apart from us, right? He has power and might that we have no knowledge of. We are creatures, right? The only thing that separates us from angels or from aardvarks or lions or worms is the fact that we are made in the image of God, which is an amazing thing, right? And that God loves us and wants to have a relationship with us. All that is amazing. But we are still creatures. We are not gods. Last night at Young Adult Study, we talked about Mormonism a little bit. And in Mormonism, they believe that when you die, if you're a really good Mormon and you do all the right things, then you can become a god, right? That's not the end goal of Christianity. It's not to become God. We can't become God. That's not our role as a creature, right? We have been created distinct for purpose. And we have to realize that, and part of that is realizing that our lives are in God's hands. So the wisdom of the psalm right here is, teach us to number our days so that we may gain a heart of wisdom. I remember in a video game I played called Civilization 4, it's about like making a civilization from the ground up. And one of the things in it that they made a really big deal about was technologies. And one of the first technologies you could research was the calendar. And I associate this verse with the calendar because every time you would research something new, you would get a quote, and they would take quotes from different places. And the quote they used was Psalm 90:12. Teach us to number days that we may gain a heart of wisdom, right? They used a different translation, I think, is teach us to number our days so that we may, something, I can't remember. Maybe it's the King James Version. In any case, it doesn't matter. It's the same idea, right? And so but it's not about calendar, right? It's not about numbering our days in the way of a calendar or something like that, although I guess the calendars can help with that. But it's literally to just help us have a knowledge of saying, I'm going to die someday, and to be like, you know when that's probably going to happen? Around this time, right? And when we do that, we realize how we can spend our time better and more productively and more in the service of God. Because we realize that in this life that we have, it's nothing compared to eternity, which is where we're headed. And so I think it's just so important to remember that, because that's what keeps us grounded and what keeps us from going off the deep end. Because if we cling to our life here on earth, it's as though we believe that eternity doesn't exist. And that's not, that is not the Christian stance, right? Maybe you don't believe eternity exists, in which case you'd have to reckon with how you understand Jesus' resurrection, how you understand the promises that we will come back, right? So I think you would be wrong about that. But that's what you would have to figure out. Now, I say all of this, the reason I wanted to talk about this is because one of my friends sent me this interesting article from Bloomberg. And it's a article about this guy. His last name's Johnson. And his name's Brian Johnson. And you can see here, it says, how to be 18 years old again for only $2 million a year. Only $2 million a year. It's not bad. Middle-age tech centimillionaire. Centimillionaire means like you're in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Brian Johnson and his team of 30 doctors say they have a plan to reboot his body. It's by this guy named Ashley Vance. And it's all about how this one guy, Brian Johnson, this guy right here, is trying to reverse the aging of his body. And according to his doctors, right, just his doctors, I don't know how other medical people have responded to this, right? But according to his doctors, he's reduced his age by about 5 years, in the sense that he's in his 40s and he has the organs of someone who is like in their late 30s, right? And I think it's so interesting because in this article, which I'll link in the description below so you can read it yourselves, it talks about all the different ways that his body is tested and stuff like that. He supposedly has the physical fitness of a 17-year-old. I don't know if that's true or whatever. He is pretty ripped, but that's because it's not necessarily because he does a lot of muscle training. It's mostly because he has like 5% body fat, which is like, if you want to know how you get to the point of being able to have a six pack, that's actually how. It's not just having really strong muscles. It's actually kind of a secondary. It's really about getting your body fat to such a low level that your muscles can show through your skin, right? So it talks about all these different things that he does, right? Like right here, it says he has a heart of a 37-year-old, the skin of a 28-year-old, and the lung capacity and fitness of an 18-year-old, which might be true. I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I don't know how to read all this stuff. But it's interesting to see what he does in order to accomplish this. So, like, most of his food is just straight up blended. He doesn't actually, like, this is his meal. Like you see here, it's broccoli. It's a vegan. He's vegan, right? Broccoli, mushrooms, cauliflower, lentils. And that's actually blended. This isn't what he eats, right? It's not sauteed or something like that. He just blends all this together. The writer, Ashley Vance, talks about like going and eating and spending a day kind of doing this guy's regimen. And like, it's just like mush. It's like dirt. He actually describes it as tasting like dirt, right? That's like something he's doing, this guy is doing in order to survive, right? He takes a bunch of pills too in order to supplement all these types of things. He does like weekly or several times a week skin treatments, light treatments, ear testing and treatments. And he gets lots of blood tests done usually. He monitors all different parts of his sleep, some of which is pretty intricate, which if you are intricate and intimate, if you end up going through the article more in depth. And all of it is this idea that you can slow down aging. And the article never answers why, and I wasn't able to figure out why. Essentially, this guy, as you can see in this paragraph here, he says, in his 30s, Johnson created a payment processing company called Braintree Payment Solutions, LLC. Massive success, long hours and stress left him overweight and deeply depressed, bordering on suicidal. He sold his business to eBay Incorporated in 2013 for $800 million in cash. Then began a long journey to sort himself out. So he ended up learning a lot about biology. He made a biotech venture, helmets that analyze brain activity to learn about the mind, right? He's one of these guys that made a ton of money and is pouring that money into things he finds fascinating, right? That's pretty typical, especially in Silicon Valley. Like, this is classic tech billionaire type material, although this guy's not a billionaire. Almost. Got pretty close. And it seems like he just has ended up developing an interest in being able to change the human body. I don't know his psyche, so I don't know if it's a fear of death that's driving this. But I see that as basically the under the surface reason that you would want to do something like this. Right? Is that you don't want to die. So what you're doing is you're doing all these incredibly invasive and expensive treatments in order to keep yourself as young as you possibly can be. And it's just really a crazy and difficult lifestyle to live in order to do this. And so the hope of his doctors and other people that are talking about this is that maybe what he's doing, right, because he's gathering all this data, is that he's going to make it possible for us, people like you and me, who don't have $2 million to spend on our health a year and maybe don't want to just solely eat a vegan diet, that'll open up opportunities or understandings to reverse aging on ourselves. And I think that there's a lot of give and take. Like, if this is true, this isn't entirely surprising, right? It's like if you live the most restrictive, like, he doesn't go outside because sun damages your skin, stuff like that, right? Or he limits how much time he has outside. It's for him only a lifestyle that a super rich person could live, because most of us cannot afford not to go outside and have a team of doctors that are treating us, right? But like, it's also not surprising that if you eat incredibly healthy and cut out all of the fine things that might make life worth living, then is it really worth it at that point? And this is always kind of my point. And I think in a world where a lot of people cling to it, is like, what type of life is worth living? And I imagine that this is, as Christians, where we bring a very different perspective. Because for some people, it might just be like, any life is worth living. It's better to be alive than dead. But Christians, we would say, well, no, that's not how that works, right? Being dead is not the worst thing in the world, because there's a resurrection. But also, if there is a resurrection, the best life possible now is not to cling to everything you have. One of the things that Jesus continually tells people, right, is to take up your cross and follow me. That means like dying to yourself, right? Living a life that is not particularly helpful for you in the sense of trying to live as long as possible. It means going out of your way, making life more difficult. I think that this is an interesting, really interesting test case or example of how far we as humans can take this type of thing. And, you know, he's going to start doing more invasive stuff like gene therapy and things like that to see it, really cutting edge type of stuff. So I think, like, I can imagine this guy living for a good amount of time. I can also just see him dying because of this type of stuff. Because at the end of the day, you can be very healthy, but you'll never know. A heart attack can get you like that. I think a part of this that summed it up the best was there was one part where he goes to his house, and right, and this guy named Ashley Vance, this writer, is living his lifestyle, and so he goes through all the tests, and he ends up getting his blood pressure taken, I believe. This is it. Because his son, this guy's son, and it's on his website. So if you go to the video, like, it has links to places. It goes to his website. His son's like 17, this Ryan Johnson guy. Brian Johnson. And his son is like shredded. He's 17. It's really funny. But anyway, so he spends like dinner with father and son. There's no mom in the picture, so I don't know what's going on there. But it's fine, whatever. After dinner, father and son watched as I inserted my arm into the cardiac health monitor on Johnson's kitchen island. This machine buzzed and whirred for a few seconds, then reported back that my ticker, at least by one measure, wasn't that far off Johnson's. It felt like a small victory for paunchy 45-year-old Scotch lovers everywhere. So the guy who's doing this, right, isn't particularly healthy. And when he puts his hand in his arm into this monitor, right, it brings back and it realizes that his and he's about the same age as Johnson, isn't that much different. So if you think about the money and time and effort that's gone into this, and I'm not saying it's not worth living a healthy lifestyle. It absolutely is. I think Christians could take a lot from people who are healthy in terms of how we steward our bodies. I know I can, so I don't mean to say that it's just a waste of time to try to be healthy. That's not the case at all, right? We want to live. If we want to live longer, we want to do it so we can serve God longer on earth, right? That should be our goal. But in this, right, you see in this one paragraph that this guy ends up having basically the same reading as Johnson. And for that, it's like that's what you work for. And it just, at a deeper level for me, goes to show that you really can't beat aging. Doctors and other people will try, because a lot of people end up just viewing the human body as matter that can be manipulated. But that clearly isn't the case. And while it can be manipulated, there isn't much you can do about it. You will end up dying one day. And I think the joy of Christianity is knowing that that isn't the end, and that you can live a life that is full of joy and pleasure in the service of the Lord. Pleasure in a greater sense, not in like base senses. Now, this dovetails really well into our question for today. So let me pull that up for us. Our question for today is, sorry, you get to see the inner workings. This question, it says, how can the Bible be interpreted when it comes to donating organs as on your license? And this is a good question, because I have an unpopular opinion for myself. Biblically speaking, So there are like some kind of not. I don't think any Christian group. I should never say that because you never know. We're a pretty broad family, and there are people out there that would probably say like, "Hey, you can't donate organs because of what." So I don't want to say that, but I would say most mainstream Christian groups, organizations, denominations, churches are fine with organ donation. And it is a miraculous process whereby we are able to take the organs of someone who is dead and give them to someone who is dying in order to bring them back, right? Restore health to them. And seems like a pretty clear-cut interpretation of like loving your neighbor as yourself, right? They're even able to give after you died to still give to people. Same thing for blood donation, right? That's a much easier, more normal example of like a normal way that we can interact and give of ourselves for the benefit of others. And so that, like, from a biblical perspective, obviously there was no way that they would have, people at the time, right, without some divine knowledge, would have ever had the idea that you could donate organs, right? It's so outside of the technology and medical practice of people in the biblical times that being able to do something like that was pretty impossible. Was impossible. No, I'm not an expert in ancient medicine, but I would imagine there were no transplants going on back then for all sorts of reasons. And so the question for all of us is like, well, what does this mean, or should we do it? And I think that's just something every Christian needs to decide for themselves. It is a wonderful way to love someone after death, right? If your organs are actually able to be used, it is a good way to do that. However, I was just talking about the medical industry with the example of Johnson, right? And how some doctors just see flesh that can be manipulated. I personally do not do organ donation. Not because I think it's a bad or evil thing or sinful. I think it's for everyone to choose. And I think the case that making you love your neighbor is a good one. However, at the same time, one of the real fears that I have and others as well is that in order to use these organs from our bodies, right, they have to be, and this is going to make it sound more gross than that, fresh. Right? You have to keep blood flowing through them or else they begin to deteriorate, die, and aren't useful, right? I mean, I think in movies and stuff, you see like the frozen box with the heart in it or whatever. That's not like how it works. Like it does, but at the same time, no, it's not, right? It's not that simple. You have to keep these things alive or else they die. So the way that they get them, right, from people is they basically are dying. They'll intubate them and they'll take the organs from them, right? And then let them die. And they're going to die anyway. I mean, in the maybe in other countries, but I'm sure in the United States, outside of malpractice cases, anyone whose organs were taken was dead medically at the time of doing it. But there's also, I guess, for my fear and of this is that there is incentive to not treat people, right? Or to take things from people in order to just do it. And I think one of the good examples of this is in 1994, the American Medical Academy said that it was okay, like a standard and normal medical practice, to just take organs from brain dead babies, right? And I think that we have this idea, again, of preserving life so much that we're kind of willing to deface the image of God in dying people in order to save those people who are alive. In terms of medical technology, you have all these like cell things that are going on and cloning of organs. And I don't know how possible that is because I'm not a biologist. But to me, hopefully that will kind of be able, for all of us to be able to put this aside if that technology ends up becoming a real thing, because we won't have to deal with that type of stuff, right? And when it comes to medical ethics and things, I think there is positives and negatives to the way that organ donation is kind of handled in the United States. So I think it's up for the individual Christian to decide. I don't think there's one more Christian response than the other. I think if you've clearly thought it through and think about it, then you can come to any conclusion about it. But as far as a biblical perspective, I would say that for the pro side, it comes down to loving your neighbors. And for the anti side, or the more, I wouldn't say anti, more hesitant side, it comes down to the image of God and humanity. But it's up to you and what your choices are. All the power to you. I'm not going to tell you what to do or how to figure that out, because that's not a high issue or things like that. So, all right. Well, everyone, that's it for today. I'm glad you guys were able to join me for a new thing today. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your Thursday. I'll see you on Sunday for worship. Peace out.